morning, good afternoon, good evening. After 45 years of rigged elections, in this day and age, one would think that by now the people of Zimbabwe have come to the consensus that they should implement the democratic reforms, make sure that the rules governing free, fair, the conduct of to guarantee free, fair, and credible elections are observed before we go on to the next elections. Unfortunately, that is not the case. We still have many people out there who still believe that even with the present political system, with all its flaws and its illegalities and lawlessness, we should participate in the elections, and what is more, we can win them. You despair. Where have these people been all these years? They have not understood what has been going on all along, all these years. We should be moving on, and yet we are stuck. Here is one of Zimbabwe's really influential academics, and whose videos have been followed by many people, including myself. But I must admit, his insistence on participating in Zimbabwe's flawed elections has left me really disappointed.
Revolutionary greetings, comrades. It's a red Sunday, the 13th of July 2025. We are discussing the Zimbabwean elections under the theme Know Your Neighbor, Build Your Community. In the last 2-3 videos, we've explained that it is practically impossible to rig elections at the polling stations in Zimbabwe. We've been explaining and will continue to explain that elections can only be rigged in a polling station where the opposition does not have polling agents. Because the ballot boxes are not transported and counted somewhere else. All ballots are counted at a polling station. They are then transported to be kept. So every political party will have access, as has been the case in the past, on the results that are posted outside a polling station.
Hitting your goals has nothing to do with discipline. The real culprit is...
Well. I have to say, this is disappointing. We cannot keep on going back and forth on the same issue. We need to make progress here. Here is a video clip where Professor Jonathan Moyo is explaining what kind of ZEC we have.
Chigumba is the mother of the rigging, and Malaba is the father of the rigging. Endorsed what the mother was doing. It is actually scandalous. You see, ZEC is not supposed to be controlled by any authority.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
It is an
independent.
independent constitutional body. In fact, independent commission. It's a Chapter 12 institution. But the ZEC did not run anything important. It never did. The computers were run by Africom. The registration, accreditation, and so forth were run by a CIO company. So between the CIO and the army, they ran the processes, the operations, using their instruments. Either Matsanga, who is actually active, she's employed. She joined the, not joined, she was seconded to the electoral body in 2008 as a divisional intelligence officer. Now she is a director in the CIO. As we speak right now, she's a director, and she was congratulated and rewarded for rigging the 2018 election. And she was given a house in Borodale, a posh mansion in there. So there is a serious problem that whereas on paper, ZEC is supposed to be an independent constitutional body that runs elections transparently, efficiently, and impartially. No, it doesn't. It doesn't because it does not even itself run. The elections are run for ZEC by the Securocrat.
How is that so difficult to understand? It is clear here that by the time you go to the polling station, the rigging would have been done. And even after the process in the polling stations, the rigging can still continue because ZEC is not independent. Even if we had the opposition who decide they will deploy election agents at all polling stations. If you read reports from other bodies like Team Pachedu, who were heavily involved in the 2023 elections, they will tell you that there were 1,000 polling stations. 1,000. And out of 11,000 polling stations, which the opposition did not know about. Team Pachedu had ways of finding out what was going on in ZEC, and they managed to find out that there'd been an additional 1,000 polling stations, which they didn't know about. They only knew about those polling stations because they managed to get V11 forms from those polling stations. So even if you are determined to deploy your election agents, if ZEC is not honest, and in this case, CIT is not honest, it doesn't tell you 10% of the polling stations. And in some of these polling stations, according to Team Pachedu, they did not have the voters' roll. So even Team Pachedu, with all their research ability, they failed to discover those polling stations, their names, and the voters' roll in those polling stations. But they did manage to get the V11 forms. And the V11 forms in one of those polling stations, Mnangagwa had 999 votes. Chamisa had 0. 999. Now, if you look at the declared polling stations which Tim Pachedu and the opposition knew, there were about 11,000, and the number of registered voters, because remember the voting system in Zimbabwe is you are registered to vote and you can only vote in one polling station. A constituency, a parliamentary constituency, will have about 50 polling stations. The voters' roll for that constituency is based on each individual polling station. There is no common voters' roll. In the past, a whole constituency will have one voters' roll, where you as the voter in that constituency could vote in any of the polling stations in that constituency. Now you can only vote in one polling station. And the number of voters in a polling station is 500, which would make sense. Times 11,000, you're getting about 5.5 million registered voters. But in these polling stations, where Tim Pachedu did not have the name of the polling station, the voters roll for that polling station, they only, after the election, only managed to get a V11 from that polling station. There were 999, twice as many people as in other polling stations. And they all voted for one candidate, Mnangagwa. How anyone can still maintain, as long as we deploy our election agencies. How do you deploy an election agent when you are not told the polling stations? They're told we have got 11,000 polling stations by ZEC. And yet on the end of the day, when the vote counting is being made, there are 12,000 polling stations. Another 1,000 you were not told. In this case here, we cannot also hide away from the fact that we do not have a competent opposition. Even those polling stations that the opposition knew, they failed to deploy election agents. This will be in line with what those opposition leaders have been thinking. In Zimbabwe, opposition leaders are not fighting to win power to form the next government. They are fighting to win the few gravy train seats that ZANU-PF allows the opposition to win. And this is why you find the opposition concentrate all their effort in the urban centers. In the rural areas, they already know that the rural voters are captured. Mnangagwa himself was boasting before these 2023 elections that ZANU-PF chairman will be in front. The villagers will fall behind, and the village head bring up the rear as they are frog marched to a polling station to vote. The reason why we have moved from a constituent-based voters roll to a polling station voters roll It's exactly because ZANU-PF wanted to be able to monitor who voted in each polling station. They already have the names of those people who can vote in that polling station. They had their own party officials at each polling station. They saw you come in and they know if you're a party member or not. And when the results come out, even if all 500 people voted in that polling station, half of them, for the sake of argument, voted for ZANU-PF, the other half for the opposition. Within 30 minutes, the ZANU-PF officials will be able to sit down and say, okay, we've got these 500 people. Who do we think would have voted for ZANU-PF here? They may get it wrong, but I think they will get a fair idea of who voted for the party and who did not. If you think of what happened in 2008, you would understand why the people in the rural area, particularly, will not take any chances and vote for the opposition. They know they will be punished. It's nonsense to talk of your vote is your secret in Zimbabwe. It is not. It has never been a secret under ZANU-PF. The party has always found ways of knowing whom you voted. We should have moved on and agreed that we need to implement the democratic reforms before we participate in the next election. But clearly we haven't. It is, of course, disappointing that after 45 years of rigged elections, we're still fighting on the platform of we can win rigged elections. Knowing your neighbor, building your community. What has that got to do with it? In the rural area, if you live in the rural area, you would know this ZANU-PF's chairman. You would know that if ZANU-PF asks you to attend a rally, you attend it, or you could be seriously punished for it. ZANU-PF has deployed the war veterans, the party's youth militia, people in the army, the police, the CIO, to help the party win elections. We all know that. This is why we need the reforms, so that those institutions like the police, the army, are independent. The other day we're talking about ZANU-PF thugs disrupting opposition leader Job Scala's book launch in Mashingo. The police were told who were the thugs who disrupted that book launch. We all know the police did nothing because they know that ZANU-PF thugs are above the law. The police, the army, the CIO, the judiciary, the ZEC, all these institutions have been corrupted to the point where they are ZANU-PF in all but name. We had the opportunity to implement the democratic reforms, which would have transformed those institutions during the 2008 to 2013 GNU. MDC leaders sold out. And now they are the ones at the front trying to tell the people that they can win rigged elections. For heaven's sake, let's get to our senses and do the rational thing. Implement the democratic reforms so that we can have free, fair, and credible elections. And stop this madness of participating in flawed elections, and the day after the voting is done, we complain that the elections were rigged. It is the right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country is a fundamental right. It's not a privilege, a fundamental right. And in this case, it's more than a right. It is the essence of good governance. Why anyone would still be stubbornly trying to win rigged elections where ZANU-PF controls ZEC to the point where they've got one body of ZEC who pretend to be managing things when in fact the party's operators are the one who are really in charge. And we pretend that as long as we deploy an election agent at all polling stations, we'll stop the rigging. It beggars belief. It shows lack of imagination. You seriously believe that only stopping ZANU-PF rigging at the polling station will stop the regime rigging the elections? They can rig before polling day, and they can rig after polling day. Why do we keep on ignoring those political realities? The 2018 court challenge by Chamisa of the result showed another aspect of this rigging. In examining the affidavits submitted by ZEC, they admitted that 16 polling stations had identical polling results, voting results, the same number of spoiled votes, the same number of total votes count. What Chamisa got in one polling station A, he also got in polling station B. What Mnangagwa got in polling station A, he also got in polling station B. Exact results in all 16. Of course, the logical explanation for it is these were double entries. The V11 of one polling station A was entered twice. That can only be the logical explanation for it. And the matter would have been settled if, by law, Chamisa and company were entitled to and asked that the sealed ballot boxes of those 16 polling stations should be opened, because they would have found only 8 sealed boxes. They could not, as much as they could double enter the V11, they could not recreate a whole ballot box. Guess who refused to have those ballot boxes opened? It was Chamisa and his team. We do not have a competent opposition party. That is the message. Let's listen to that video clip and hear it for yourself.
Zimbabwe have now held their recent elections, which went well.
International monitors had to force their way through angry crowds to deliver their verdict. They reported serious flaws in the process. It was not a level playing field. Many injured and 3 dead. The opposition says the shootings and the beatings cannot be justified. And an election in which Zimbabwe dared to dream has instead brought back its worst nightmares. There were running battles through the city centre and the streets echoed to the sound of gunfire.
Zimbabwe have now held their recent elections, which went well.
You are ready now to start. I am ready. You may start.
Thank you, my lord. What ZEC has done is to violate the constitution, to violate the electoral act in a manner which has ultimately benefited the first respondent. National and Central, page 159, the report by the ZBC, it does 2 things. Number 1, it mentions figures. Number 2, it attributes those figures to a ZEC official. It says by 5:30 p.m., 105,000 people had voted in National and Central. The final figure that one gets from ZEC is that an hour and 30 minutes later, plus 370,000 people voted. Is it humanly possible? But it doesn't end there. Then there is the issue of identical polling results. There are at least 16 polling stations with identical results. Identical results for Chamisa, identical results for Mnangagwa, identical spoiled votes. And in all those places, Mnangagwa not only wins, but wins big. It's like a kid was playing with the figures. That, with respect, is not how an election is conducted.
We'll now give the opportunity to Mr. Kanengoni.
The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission cannot be taken to task to say, why is the voter turnout in my central at this particular level and not at that particular level? Voters behave the way they do. No one knows why. Maybe behavioral scientists may be able to answer the question if they study it.
Mr. Kanengoni, there's the averment that several polling stations showed identical results.
And the simple point we make is that there's no need to be theoretical about it. We have the returns. This is something that happened. We show you the returns. And we've put the returns for 2 of those polling stations here to illustrate the point.
You say it happened?
Yes.
But in his presentation, Pofo says it's actually 16 polling stations where the identical results. You heard it?
Yes, we did. Even in the affidavit, they put a bit more of the polling stations there. But we chose this to illustrate to the court. But for the rest, it did happen. It did actually occur.
We'll now go back to the applicant. Why go for speculative conclusions of manipulation?
The point that I wish to make is that this is evidence of manipulation by ZEC after the process. Now, if you go to what they call the primary data, you're going to see manipulated data. So the applicant cannot ask a court to open residue which has already been manipulated. If you go to the residue, you will drink from a poisoned well. When you look at the figures, let's look at those that have been admitted by ZEC. Let's look at the parliamentary tally. When we show that 40,000 people are said to have voted in the presidential election and not in the primary election, and ZEC does.
No need to go to that one. But the most important point there is that Chief Justice Malawa reminded Chamisa's lawyers that they could and they should have requested to have the sealed ballot boxes of those 16 polling stations opened. And it is Chamisa's lawyer who is arguing that he didn't want to go there because it was a poisoned well. Poison to whom? Chamisa or to ZEC? It's amazing how our opposition have been corrupted to the point of becoming utterly useless. The opposition would have settled the matter if they'd gone for the primary data and have the sealed boxes opened. Because like I said, there is no way you can duplicate the entry in totaling up the votes of each candidate. You can double enter it. But you cannot duplicate a polling station complete with the sealed boxes and the officials at each polling station. You cannot. And the fact that in this case here, like it was emphasized, the 16 polling stations had one thing in common. Mnangagwa did very well. You can see what was happening here. There were double entries to top up Mnangagwa's vote. And the opposition were cooperating, going through the motion of challenging it to appear to give the process credibility that they are challenging it, but without ever really meaningfully challenging the process. They were content to have the few voters, the few gravy trade seats that they would win. This was shown again in 2023 when SADC and the AU condemned those electoral processes as flawed and illegal and said so. That did not stop the opposition leaders like David Coulthard, Fazai Mahere, and many others who had won seats in that 2023 elections, taking up their seats. Yes, they had their other problems with Sengezo Savango, who started recalling some of those. That was later on. The immediate thing was the opposition accepted, took up their seats, and some of them even argued that they had won in those liberated zones, as if to say in those areas, the urban centers, there was a verified voters roll, whilst the rest of the country did not have a verified voters roll. That's nonsense. There was no verified voters roll for the whole country. We need to get over this issue. We cannot keep on participating in flawed elections, which we know are flawed, which we know that if we participate, we're only giving the process legitimacy. And perpetuating the nation's suffering. For heaven's sake, let's have the common sense to finally say, okay, forget this nonsense of winning rigged elections. Let's have free, fair, and credible elections. What is so difficult about that? I really seriously hope 2028 we will be going into those elections knowing fully well that we are not going to participate until reforms are implemented. And if ZANU-PF goes ahead with elections without reforms, we know that the likes of Chamisa will participate as they've done in the past, because they're not interested in that the elections are free, fair, and credible. They don't care about that. All they want is a share of the gravy train seats. The problem is with us, the voters. We are the ones who are being conned to believe that the opposition would win and we should participate. We should stop participating in flawed elections, which will only give ZANU-PF legitimacy, give the opposition a few gravy train seats, whilst perpetuating our own suffering. How that can be so difficult for some people to comprehend beggars belief, particularly after 45 years of rigged elections. Come 2028, it will be 48 years of rigged election. That's a whole generation. And we still cannot comprehend what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. Amazing. It really is amazing. No wonder we have failed state. And as long as we maintain this myopic, idiotic mentality, Zimbabwe will remain a failed state. That is